For 3 years, they laughed at me. They called my dream a hobby, my ambition just a phase. They saw the laptop, but they never saw the late nights. They saw the little online shop, but they never saw the six-figure empire I was building in absolute silence. That night, at the annual family reunion, I didn't announce my success. I let it speak for me. This is the story of how I stopped needing the approval of people who called my life's work a joke. And if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or like your dreams don't matter to the people around you, this one's for you. I never liked reunions. Let me be honest with you about what these gatherings really are. They're not celebrations of family love. They're carefully staged exhibitions, a display of borrowed successes and manufactured confidence. Hello, my name is Emily Carter, and every year my family puts on this pageant at Uncle Richard's Vineyard. It's a catalog of individual triumphs, worn like expensive, slightly itchy suits that everyone pretends fit perfectly. The laughter here, year after year, is a brittle thing, sharp-edged and rehearsed. It cuts the air rather than filling it. And the smiles? They're porcelain armor, far too polished to be real. There's a sound to silence, and it isn't the absence of noise. It's the engine cooling down in an empty garage after a 14-hour day, the key turning in a lock when everyone else is asleep. But mostly, it's the sound of permission granted, not by the world, but by yourself. For years, I drove toward applause. That night, I drove away from it. This is how I learned to stop needing the approval of people who never understood what I was building. And then there were the questions. Oh, the questions. They weren't born of genuine interest, but of polite, inherited cruelty. They would always ask, "So, what have you been up to these days? Still running that little online thing?" The line was always the same, delivered with studied casualness that barely concealed their intent. For years, that casual phrase, that little online thing, was the quiet joke, the family shorthand for a failed experiment, an amusing, stubborn delusion that I just couldn't let go of. I had to learn that the sting in their voice wasn't a measure of my worth, but a measure of their own small, rigid understanding of success. They could only see success in the shapes they recognized: corner offices, business cards, company parking spaces. What they couldn't see was that I was building something entirely different, something that didn't fit their narrow definition of real work. My cousins carried their titles like medals, heavy medallions of validation clinking softly against their designer fabrics. Mark Carter, Senior Financial Analyst. His title was a thick physical shield. It suggested quarterly reports and power lunches and a certainty about the world that I found utterly exhausting. Chloe Carter, Marketing Executive. She was perpetually kinetic, always networking. Her energy was bright and synthetic, like artificial sweetener. It looked right, but something about it never felt natural. David Carter, Project Manager. The steady one, the predictable axis upon which the family consensus turned. Reliable, respectable, everything I apparently wasn't. And then, separated by the immense gulf of perceived failure, there was me. No title, no company badge, no corner office or business cards to hand out at networking events. Just Emily, the girl who sells things on the internet. They didn't know it yet, but my lack of a title was my armor, and my little thing was already beginning to move the earth beneath their expensive shoes. Dinner was a campaign, long and loud. It was a rhythmic cacophony of success, the nervous clink of wine glasses, the aggressive scrape of forks against thin porcelain, and the endless, booming anecdotes about equity, market share, and the sheer, exhausting weight of being a success story. "So, Emily," Mark said, his voice carefully modulated, loud enough to draw in the periphery of the table, "how's your little shop going?" The word little wasn't spoken, it was dropped, a calculated, buzzing insult that lingered in the warm vineyard air like a persistent net I couldn't swat away. It carried the weight of everything they felt about my work: unserious, temporary, cute. "It's going well, steady," I responded. Mark's dismissive laugh was sharp and brief. "Steady's good, I suppose. Not everyone's built for the corporate climb." "Yeah, but it must be nice not to deal with real pressure, right? The big boardroom stuff, the actual stakes." I held the silence like a fragile white flag, choosing the hollow comfort of peace over the necessary, burning fire of pride. They wanted a performance of humility, and I gave it to them. But they were asking about pressure while knowing nothing of the weight I actually carried. They didn't know the nights I spent staring at the cold blue glow of analytics until sunrise. They didn't know the corrosive shame of failed ad campaigns, watching hundreds of dollars vanish into the digital void. They didn't know about the fortress of cardboard boxes stacked in my tiny living room, or the sudden, quiet tears shed after every inevitable setback. And they definitely didn't know the most important number, that my little shop, built brick by digital brick, had just crossed 6 figures in annual revenue. It was a secret I kept pressed between my teeth, tasting like iron. But I didn't say a word. Some victories aren't meant for the table. They're meant for time. They're meant for the slow, silent accumulation of proof. The success wasn't built on easy loans or inherited wealth. It was built on the scorched earth of desperation. 3 years earlier, I was a ghost. I existed within 4 beige cubicle walls, trapped in a dead-end office job, answering emails for people who never bothered to remember my name. The fluorescent lights hummed with a dulling, soul-crushing certainty. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet. My desk was a tomb of pending files, and I could feel the life draining out of me, drip by bureaucratic drip. It was a soft prison. You had a chair, a salary, and the promise of a mediocre retirement. But every day was a negotiation with myself. How much of my fire am I willing to trade for this hollow sense of safety? The day I quit, I didn't feel brave. I felt utterly, terrifyingly small. I was stepping off a cliff, but the air felt clearer already. When I told my parents I was leaving the security of the office to start an e-commerce business, even they thought I was being recklessly romantic. "Emily, what if it doesn't work?" my worried mother asked. I remember looking her in the eye and speaking the sentence that became my manifesto: "What if it does?" I started with $800. That was the war chest, and a laptop that didn't purr. It whined with a desperate, tinny sound and overheated so quickly that I had to place it on a stack of textbooks when I ran Photoshop. The first month, the silence was absolute. I sold nothing. I refreshed the dashboard 20 times a day, expecting a notification that never arrived. It was like shouting into a vast empty canyon and only hearing the echo of my own foolishness. The second month brought a flicker of hope. 2 sales. I remember the adrenaline, the frantic packing, and the trip to the post office. I felt like I was finally, actually doing it. Then came the inevitable. Both orders came back, both returns. I almost gave up. The keyboard became a hostile surface. The little online thing felt like a dead weight tied to my ankle. I sat in the dark, surrounded by inventory, my future stacked up in dusty cardboard, mocking me. But that's where the true beginning happens. When the voice of doubt is loudest, something else takes over. A tiny, unshakable refusal. Something inside me whispered, "Keep going." Quietly, but keep going. That whispered command, "Keep going," was the only permission I needed. After the shame of those 2 returns, the whole thing stopped being a hobby and became a spiritual discipline, a discipline of silence. I couldn't afford mistakes, so I became my own university. I devoured marketing textbooks until my eyes burned. I learned design, wrestling with code that seemed determined to break every time I thought I understood it. I read about branding, logistics, customer psychology. While the rest of the world sank into the soft, silent velvet of sleep, I was awake, building not with mortar and stone, but brick by digital brick, chiseling an empire out of the darkest hours. I had to become comfortable with being lonely. Loneliness is the prerequisite for transformation. There were no water cooler conversations to break the monotony, only the endless, objective feedback loop of numbers. I failed more times than I could count, but failure became simply data, telling me where to pivot and where to dig harder. I worked through weekends, I sacrificed holidays, I missed birthdays. My life was defined by the relentless cycle of testing, adjusting, and surviving. There were days I genuinely thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life, a rookie error that would leave me broke and humiliated. But I kept showing up, because showing up, even when you feel like a fraud, is the only way forward. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to understand something profound about success. It doesn't always start with applause. It starts in silence. It's the moment when you choose to keep building, even when no one's watching. Because the moment you're forced to step into the light, your work has to be strong enough to stand on its own. It can't rely on explanations or excuses or the goodwill of people who never believed in it anyway. I learned to find validation in the work itself, in the satisfaction of a perfectly optimized ad campaign, in the joy of a customer's 5-star review, in the quiet pride of solving problems that no business school had taught me existed. The discipline of silence taught me something my cousins with their corporate titles would never understand. Real strength doesn't announce itself, it simply is. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. It started with a single small win, then two, then orders came in from cities I'd only ever seen on a map. The reviews improved. They weren't just about the product, they were about the experience, the packaging, the quiet care I put into every shipment. My confidence didn't jump, it followed. It tracked the revenue curve like a cautious shadow. Every positive comment was a tiny validation, a necessary injection of belief I had to administer to myself. I finally understood the equation. Success doesn't need permission, it just needs persistence. Now, sometimes, the same people who had dismissed my dreams started sending hesitant, late-night texts asking for advice on side hustles. Their words were a strange, sweet form of irony. They were looking for the easy formula. They didn't want the 3 years of quiet humiliation and tireless effort that came before it. They wanted the result without the process, the applause without the silence. I was lost in the echo chamber of my own memories when the sound system crackled. Grandma June, our 83-year-old matriarch, called for attention. She was the immovable object in our family's trajectory of ambition. She didn't have a title, but she commanded the room with the sheer, powerful weight of her years and wisdom. Her voice was soft but commanding. It wasn't a shout, it was a directive, a final word that everyone instinctively respected. "Everyone, I want Emily to share something." My heart didn't just skip, it hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird desperate to escape. Me? I had spent the entire evening successfully blending into the expensive upholstery, invisible and safe. She only smiled, a genuine, luminous expression that cut through the polished armor of the room like sunlight through fog. "Yes, you. You've built something wonderful. Tell everyone how you did it." The floor became a sudden vast distance. I stood up, feeling the heat of 100 eyes on me, the oppressive glow of those judgmental string lights. My palms were sweating, but this time the feeling was different. It wasn't the sweat of fear. It was the nervous energy of a hidden engine finally being started. My moment of silent, private proof had become suddenly, terrifyingly public. As I stood in front, the room was completely silent. I looked at them, at Mark, who only understood spreadsheets, at Chloe, who only valued scale, at David, who thought success had to look exactly like his version of it. And suddenly, the fear vanished, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. This wasn't about justifying myself to them. This was about honoring the girl who stayed up until 4 in the morning, who refused to quit when everyone expected her to. And I started my speech with my voice clear and strong. It wasn't easy. I failed more times than I can count. Failure wasn't an option, it was a daily occurrence. I worked through weekends, holidays, and birthdays, missing every social milestone because I was convinced that if I stopped, it would all collapse. There were nights I sat in my small apartment, drowning in a sea of inventory, thinking, I've made the worst mistake of my life. I was trading the soft, guaranteed income of a cubicle for the terrifying, unromantic grind of the unknown. And for what? For a dream that everyone else called a little online thing. But I kept showing up. I didn't have a corporate ladder to climb. I had a digital mountain to build. And I learned the most fundamental truth about ambition. Success doesn't always start with applause. It starts in silence. It starts in the moment you choose to keep building, even with no one's watching. Because the moment you rely on external validation, you hand the keys to your future to people who don't even remember your name. I used to feel embarrassed about what I did, about not having a title, about the boxes in my living room, and about not fitting into the catalog of success stories that this family compiles every year. But now I understand. Growth doesn't need permission, it just needs persistence. And my persistence, which looked like quiet refusal to all of you, was actually me building something so strong, so self-sufficient, that it required none of your input and none of your approval. The words surprised even me. They were a truth I had been building for 3 years, and now it was finally out, filling the space between us like clean air after a storm. For once, no nervous laughter, no smirks, just stillness. The kind of profound stillness that settles after a profound truth has been spoken. Grandma June's voice, soft but carrying. That is the sound of strength, Emily. The evening faded and the crowd dispersed, leaving behind the ghost of expensive perfume and something that felt like regret, or maybe recognition. I was gathering my things when I heard hesitant footsteps. Mark approached me quietly. He wasn't the senior financial analyst anymore. He was just Mark. He was rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture that revealed more nervousness than any spreadsheet ever could. Hey, Em, that was really inspiring. I didn't realize how much work you've put in. He used the word work now, not hobby or thing. That was the change. That was the shift in the universe I had been working toward for 3 years. Most people don't, I said simply, until it works. He laughed softly, the sound less like a cracked bell this time, and more like a nervous cough. Guess I've been looking at success the wrong way. I thought it had to be loud. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The conversation had ended the moment I spoke my truth. Because the truth, the 6-figure revenue, the logistical battleground of my apartment, the thousands of hours of effort had already spoken for me. When I drove home that night, the highway lights blurred against the windshield like a line of tiny liquid suns. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter, freer. Not because they had finally granted me their respect, but because I finally understood that I no longer needed them to. Their validation, which I had craved for years, was useless to me now. I realized something profound that night, something that the quiet grind had etched onto my soul. Being underestimated is a gift. It gives you the quiet space to build, to grow, to prepare, without interference, without the noise of advice or expectation. They're too busy looking at the loud successes to notice the silent, patient work happening in the shadows. And when you finally step into the light, you don't need to announce yourself. Your work does that for you. It speaks in the language of persistence, of proof, of profits. So yes, I'm still the cousin with the little online thing. Only now, that little thing has become the empire they once laughed at. An empire built not on boardroom bravado or inherited titles, but on $800, a dying laptop, and a relentless, unwavering refusal to quit. And the best part? I built it in silence. If you're watching this and you feel invisible, underestimated, or like your dreams don't matter to the people around you, this story is for you. Your work doesn't need their permission to be valuable. Your success doesn't need their applause to be real. Sometimes the greatest victories happen in silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is keep building when no one believes you can. The people who matter will see your work when it's ready to be seen. Until then, let their underestimation be your gift. Let their dismissal be your fuel. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments, what are you building in silence? What dream are you refusing to give up on? I read every comment and I believe in you. And if you want more stories about turning dreams into reality, about building something meaningful from nothing, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're just getting started. Remember, growth doesn't need permission. It just needs persistence. Keep building, keep going, and do it quietly until your work is loud enough to speak for itself.